Have you ever had the quiet sense that a moment didn't unfold the way it was supposed to? Not dramatically, just subtly off. Like checking the time, looking away, then checking again, and feeling as if those seconds didn't quite belong to you. Maybe it happens while waiting in line or standing alone at night, when everything looks normal, but feels slightly misaligned. You don't panic, you don't question it out loud. You simply register it and move on. But the impression lingers, unresolved. What if that sensation isn't stress, fatigue, or imagination? What if it's your perception noticing something most people move past too quickly? For over a century, physics has been uncovering fractures in how reality behaves, cracks that only appear when observation itself becomes part of the system. Concepts like quantum consciousness and hidden reality weren't introduced to sound poetic. They emerged because reality stopped behaving like an objective stage and started acting like a process. The unsettling part isn't that the world is strange, it's that it's precise. And if you've ever felt that quiet mismatch between what you see and what you sense, it may not be random at all. Leaving now wouldn't mean missing information. It would mean turning away from the moment when that recognition begins to make sense. If you're still here, it isn't because you're looking for answers. It's because something in that moment registered quietly, before language caught up. A like, in this space, isn't approval. It's a private acknowledgement that your perception paused and noticed. Staying subscribed isn't commitment to conclusions, but to continuity, to following the question while it's still forming. If one thought is surfacing now, let it appear briefly in the comments, starting with, "I noticed that," and let it remain unfinished if it needs to. What comes next isn't interpretation or theory. It's the first time physics itself encountered the same disturbance and couldn't make it disappear. What unsettled physics didn't begin as a philosophical question, but as a technical problem that refused to stay contained. In 1801, at the Royal Institution in London, Thomas Young set out to clarify whether light behaved as a wave or a particle. The setup was simple by today's standards: light passing through two narrow slits, projecting onto a screen. When no attempt was made to determine which slit the light passed through, an interference pattern appeared, overlapping bands that only waves can produce. But when measurement was introduced, even indirectly, the pattern collapsed. The light behaved like discrete particles instead. This wasn't an error. It was reproducible, and it didn't go away with better instruments. More than a century later, physicists tried to eliminate the human factor entirely. In 1982, at the University of New Mexico, Marlon Scully and Kai Druhl refined the experiment into what became known as the quantum eraser. Their goal was to remove conscious observation from the equation. What they found made the problem worse. The outcome depended not on physical disturbance, but on whether information about the system existed at all. If the path information could, even in principle, be known, the interference vanished. When that information was erased, the wave pattern returned. The observer effect wasn't about eyes watching particles. It was about reality responding to knowledge within the quantum field itself. And this means that you are not merely witnessing a finished world unfolding in front of you. Your perception is part of the mechanism that stabilizes experience. The subtle shifts you've felt, moments changing once noticed, situations feeling different the instant attention lands on them, aren't imagination filling gaps. They mirror a system where outcomes finalize only after interaction. This isn't consciousness controlling reality, but consciousness participating in how uncertainty resolves. That sense of expansion, when awareness sharpens instead of drifts, aligns with how systems reduce noise and collapse possibility into form. But physics ran into a deeper problem it couldn't resolve. If observation alters outcomes, and if information, not force, drives the change, then where does observation truly begin? Is it at the detector, the brain, or somewhere earlier, inside the structure that decides what becomes real before you're even aware you noticed it? What physics turned to next wasn't about particles choosing paths, but about systems choosing coherence. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, researchers studying perception began noticing a pattern that appeared across disciplines. At institutions like the Max Planck Institute and later MIT, neuroscientists examining phase synchronization found that when separate neural networks enter coherent oscillation, information moves with far less resistance. Signals arrive cleaner. Noise drops. The system doesn't work harder. It aligns. At the same time, physicists studying coherent states in quantum systems observed something parallel. When elements of a system synchronize, behavior becomes more stable and predictable without external control. Order emerges not from force, but from internal alignment within an information field. And this explains why certain moments in your life don't build gradually, but arrive all at once. The sudden intuition that feels bodily before it feels logical. The quiet that falls over your thoughts when something finally makes sense. The unexpected clarity where your breathing slows and your chest loosens, as if tension you weren't consciously holding has released. These sensations aren't mystical signals. They're what coherence feels like from the inside. When internal interference drops, perception sharpens. When noise recedes, meaning doesn't need to be chased, it appears. Physics doesn't claim that consciousness generates reality, but it does show that systems process reality differently when coherence is present. A coherent system extracts more signal from the same environment, less effort, less distortion. That's why attention sometimes feels heavier than distraction. Maintaining coherence requires energy. It demands presence. It resists fragmentation. And as studies in both neural dynamics and quantum fields suggest, coherence narrows possibilities. It stabilizes one interpretation over many. This is where the loop closes and tightens. Because once perception becomes more coherent, it also becomes less buffered. You notice gaps faster. Contradictions feel sharper. Distraction stops working the way it used to. Understanding this doesn't elevate you, it exposes you. And that exposure carries a cost most people instinctively avoid paying. That exposure doesn't announce itself dramatically. It settles in quietly. You begin to notice how quickly conversations move past questions you're still holding. How often certainty is chosen for comfort, not accuracy. Rooms feel louder, not because of sound, but because of how much is being ignored. You may find yourself pausing before responding, sensing there's more beneath what's being said, and realizing there's rarely space for that depth to land. There's a particular loneliness in that awareness. Not the absence of people, but the absence of shared tempo. You're present, listening, functioning, yet slightly out of sync. Doubt follows, not about reality, but about yourself. You wonder if noticing more means losing something simpler. If attention itself has made you harder to understand or harder to place. Nothing is wrong, but something no longer fits the way it once did. This isn't insight as empowerment. It's perception as weight. The more clearly you sense structure beneath appearances, the less automatic life feels. Habits reveal their scaffolding. Assumptions show their seams. You stop reacting on cue, and that hesitation can look like distance. It can feel like standing just outside the rhythm most people rely on to feel secure. And yet, that discomfort isn't random. It's not a personality flaw or a social failure. It's the human side of what physics has been hinting at all along, that clarity comes with less insulation. The systems that sharpen perception also reduce buffering. To see more clearly is to feel more directly, without the softening layers most routines provide. And recognizing that cost is what prepares you for the final shift, the one that reframes everything you've been experiencing, without trying to make it comfortable. What begins to come into focus here isn't the idea that you're separate from others, but that your perception lingers where most collapse quickly. Not ahead, not superior, just exposed to more of the process before it settles. The science you've moved through didn't describe a strange or mystical universe. It described a conditional one. Observation alters outcomes. Information reshapes behavior. Coherence sharpens signal while reducing insulation. Emotionally, that translated into distance, hesitation, and the quiet cost of not fitting seamlessly into rhythms built for certainty. Scientifically, it revealed something even more unsettling. Reality does not arrive fully formed. It stabilizes. Feeling different isn't a defect in temperament or a failure to adapt. It's what happens when awareness stays present long enough to notice the delay between possibility and conclusion. Physics shows that systems don't finalize until interaction occurs. Neuroscience shows that coherence reduces noise, but demands energy. Together, they suggest a reality that doesn't resolve itself uniformly, but unevenly. depending on attention, alignment, and timing. Here's the unresolved implication. If reality only becomes definite after interaction, then there exists a fraction of experience before it locks in. A narrow threshold where interpretation hasn't yet hardened into certainty. A space before meaning feels owned. Physics can describe the boundary, but it can't occupy it. Consciousness, however, seems to hover there naturally, not creating outcomes, but encountering them before they stabilize. That space isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It feels like hesitation, like a pause you didn't plan. But once you've noticed it, it's difficult to return to the comfort of immediacy. You start sensing when meaning is about to collapse, when assumptions are about to settle, when perception is still fluid. This video doesn't resolve what that threshold is or what it implies. It simply marks its existence. And knowing where that edge lies quietly changes how you move forward, because what waits beyond it doesn't disappear just because you stop naming it. What matters now isn't resolution, but awareness of where you are standing. If this felt unfinished, that's because it was meant to be. Remaining connected here isn't about collecting explanations, but about staying present as perception continues to shift beneath familiar definitions. If one final thought surfaced while listening, you might notice yourself wanting to say, "This made me realize," not as a conclusion, but as a continuation. The next step doesn't clarify what was opened here. It presses closer to it. The next video is called "What Scientists Mean When They Say Reality is Not Objective," and it begins exactly at the point where certainty starts to feel unstable. Your consciousness brought you here. What happens now is your choice.